Welcome to the Recovering Radical podcast, the space where women like you untangle the guilt, shame, and pressure you carried out of high control Christianity and instead step into an embodied faith. I'm Allison Metcalfe, coach, fellow recovering charismatic, and woman who just discovered the power of the body on her journey to heal from religious trauma and spiritual abuse. We'll be talking about reconnecting with your intuition, rebuilding self-trust, digging into nervous system healing, and finding a spirituality that empowers you instead of controls. If you've deconstructed mentally but still feel it in your body every single day, this is the place for you. Thanks for joining us today. In this episode, I talked to Sarah Ward, sexologist and intimacy coach, and we get into evangelicalism, libido, and desire. So buckle in for this really juicy episode. I think you're going to enjoy it. All right, so let's jump right in. And just for the listeners, I would love for you to tell them what a sexologist and intimacy coach does. Just broad view. What do you do?
I love that. Thank you for that invitation. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Allison. So a sexologist, this job is to help educate people around sexuality. And the lens that I work with is really somatic in nature. And if you're unfamiliar with the soma, somatic essentially means flesh. And so this has to do with the body. And the really fascinating thing about how our brains and our bodies intersect is that your brain can be light years ahead, where we can learn and integrate and change the way that we think a lot faster than we can change what's written in the body. So there may be people in your audience that are mentally checked out, but are still showing up to church on a regular basis. And that might be part of what's going on, where the soma, the body essentially is like a book of life, right? And so every experience that we've had is written in the body. So when I bring up the somatic element, it's working with the body and helping people just be able to make peace with maybe traumatic experiences that they've had, to be able to let that shit go. So it's like a re-education, I suppose, a re-education of the body and learning to inhabit it. I think for many of us for the first time as well. We all have bodies, but yet there's such a distancing that happens between us and our bodies. And then as an intimacy coach, I'm working with people where they'll come to me with okay, I'm having erection difficulties, or my body's not responding to my husband anymore. I don't want to have sex with him. What is going on? And so going deeper into what the potential stories could be, things that might need to be resolved, providing them with skills, conversation tactics, as well as a lot of somatic tools, breath work, pleasure practices in order to help them to just drop into their bodies. That's the essence of what a sexologist and a somatic coach does.
That is so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And it really aligns with what is going on in the deconstruction space and what I do, which I talk about it a lot, about how you can deconstruct and intellectually believe new things. And then your body, it feels like it's hijacking you. And it's I don't even believe this anymore. So why isn't my body on the same page? And I think sex is probably the most potent place where this is showing up very strongly, where you maybe have updated some of the beliefs you had about purity culture and some other things that you were taught in church about your body being evil or about sex being dangerous or bad or any of that. You might not believe that anymore, but it's still showing up in your bedroom or with your personal pleasure practice, or maybe no pleasure practice, whatever's going on. And so leading into, I want to talk about libido and desire, because I feel that's probably the number one thing people are especially not always, but a lot of women are where did my libido and my desire go? That is a huge question. And so I would love to talk about what you see in that realm. And do you ever work with people who have religious trauma as the main factor that's affecting their libido and their desire?
That's such a fascinating question. I mean, I feel like patient zero in a lot of ways too, right? Where I was noticing these things showing up for myself. And then I have clients where this shows up for them as well. And there is so, oh my gosh, I feel like we could talk for days about this as well. So there's the safety element, which I think is so integral. If somebody is feeling like sex is a duty, and that this is something that they're having to do for somebody else, for one thing, that becomes like erotic caretaking,
Yeah.
where for a lot of women, like they're not being invited into their own desire because we've been told that men have really high libido and women just don't. And
Yeah.
that's not always true, quite honestly. There's what might be important for your listeners to know about is there's two types of desire or arousal. So there's like spontaneous desire, and then there is responsive desire. And the idea of spontaneous desire is if oftentimes we associate this with men, but not necessarily so. That's not always true in reality, where maybe a husband sees his sexy wife get out of the shower and she's, dripping wet, and he can like, he sees a flash of her thigh and he's like, oh my God, I could have sex right now. And no
Yeah.
actual interaction has happened at this point. He's
Hmm.
just gotten a spark of an idea, and that is spontaneous desire. So the other type of desire is responsive desire. This is the slow burn. This is like, well, I wasn't really intending to have sex in this moment, but I like what's happening. And you're speaking sweetly to me and you're touching me really nicely. And maybe I could get down with this. That's the more of the slow burn. And we assume that spontaneous desire is always male and responsive desire is always female, but that's not necessarily the case. I've
Right.
certainly worked with men who have said, I am a responsive desire, and I feel shamed by my female partner when she says, why aren't you responding the way that you're supposed to? Because society has all these scripts around how things are supposed to go.
Yeah.
So about 70% of men have spontaneous desire, and there's less women that do, but there's still women that have spontaneous desire. And so these people feel like they're made wrong one way or the other, because it's like they're not showing up and following the cultural script. But that's not who we are. Like, people are complex and messy. And so you get to be like whoever you are and not have to just like follow a certain things.
I'm really glad you went over that because I mean, sometimes you do hear about this in like Christian marriage teachings and stuff, but it often is extremely gendered, and very assumptive in nature. And so that can really create a lot of shame. So I'm glad you kind of talked about like the two types of arousal. I would really love to talk about, you talked about safety. How would you, well, let me give you an example. So shame is so internalized in the church. I know that you have a background in Mormonism, and I think Mormonism has similar purity teachings for young people that evangelicalism has. For example, premarital sex, especially for women, being made seen as like, okay, they're used, they're impure. It's funny how it's like not as important for the men, but really important for the women. And then there's just tons, what I see, tons of sexual repression before marriage, and then a really bizarre shift of obligation, like you said, duty sex after marriage. So I was going to ask you, like, if you want to share any of your own experiences coming out of Mormonism and how that affected your sexuality, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that invitation. And very much so, like, it's such a funny paradigm to be in, to be like, no, 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 no. Like, we literally had this like pamphlet that was called For the Strength of Youth, where it said, do not stimulate your body and do
Yeah.
not stimulate the body of another. Like, when I was engaged, we had what we called the 3-second rule, where we were like, you can only kiss for 3 seconds. And like, we broke that 1,000 times, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
we were trying so hard to be like good and pure and virginal. And gosh, it was so tricky. And I just want to speak to like the lived reality of where we're told, okay, like, no wet blanket on top of any sort of desire or arousal that you have. But then once you like exchange rings and say, I do, then you're supposed to be like a sex kitten and be able to
Yeah.
be like a total freak in the sheets. Like, how the hell did you learn that? If it was like all and then nothing, right? So I remember when I was deconstructing, I was still married at the time. I'm divorced now. And I was just feeling a lot of grief around like, holy hell, I didn't have a chance to explore this in any way. Like I have a very visceral memory of being 14 years old and I was interested in this like slightly older guy. And my parents sat me down when all the other kids had gone to bed and they were like, listen, he only wants you for one thing. And it was a really intense, like, no, this part of you like doesn't get to be here. And I'm so sure that I had triggered my parents who were uncomfortable in their own sexuality into being like, we got to shut it down. So in a lot of ways, I feel like we're designed to be asexual, like while we're in the church. And then it's this whole kind of unraveling. And that doesn't happen overnight. It just frankly does not. So I see this in the forums. I see the comments that people leave of like, well, we've actually never had penetrative sex because it's been too painful for me. That's a somatic nervous system response of not feeling safe, right? As far as my story is concerned, there was this moment where my partner and I are separated at this point, and I had an opportunity to be able to like have other experiences. And I knew that I wanted to have them, but it felt like everything inside of me, speak to like what you were saying earlier, right? How the body is betraying us, where I want this, cognitive Sarah wants this, and the body's like, whoa, 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 slow down, sister. And it was really challenging for me to figure out how to live like this. And really, this led me into a journey into the somatic realm because I just felt such a huge block. I feel like there's 1,000 more things that I can say to you about this, but essentially, like, I know what that's like to want something different than what you're having, and to not know how to name it. And even once I do name it, to know how to go after it and to let myself have that. Like there were just, in so many ways, it felt like my body was a gated community that I didn't have the code to. And like my husband did, and my pastor did, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, this was the realm of like, I get to do things for other people and not for myself.
Holy moly. That also, just looping it back around to like, that ties to the colonization of female bodies, especially in patriarchal religious circles. Like you're an exploitative resource to be plundered, and you don't even have the rights to your own soil. Someone else does. Like that's
No, to go along with that, I remember hearing this podcast from another, I think she was like a Mormon sex somebody or another. And she said something to the effect of like, even once you're married as Mormon women, you don't have the right to engage with yourself sexually. The permission that you have is through your husband. So when we're together, then you can experience your body, but not otherwise. So it's really, God, the guilt and the shame is such a big reason why a lot of us don't go those places. It's just too scary.
Yeah, that's widely taught in Christianity too. And it's crazy. There's a Bible verse about, it's terrible, but it's like the woman doesn't have a right to her own body, the man does, or like you both owe each other. It's really interesting. And the way it's interpreted is usually like, don't ever say no, first of all. And then also like, yeah. So where's the safety in that? If you don't have, if you are going to be spiritually punished or be committing some sort of spiritual sin, if you're saying no, then you don't actually have a free choice. So that gets into really unsafe territory. And then also the idea that you would have to ask, like very specifically that you need to ask if you're going to masturbate. And really, if you were going to masturbate, it would have to be a group activity anyways, because it would be stealing from his rights or something. And so it's funny because you were talking about nothing, nothing, nothing before you're married or whatever. This is in religious circles, and then turn on the switch, but then would not exploring your own like sexuality privately. Wouldn't that be a really good way to learn how to turn on and communicate better with your partner?
Absolutely. Yes. There was a Mormon feminist retreat that I went to many years ago, and our special guest, like our keynote speaker, was a sex therapist. As we are there, people are submitting these anonymous questions to her. And one of the women in the room, it's this intimate group of like 30 of us, she says, how do I know what I like? And I remember my heart was filled with so much compassion. And also like, that was a big wake up moment for me where I was like, wait, you don't know. Oh, interesting. Oh, interesting. And she essentially told this woman, like, the only way you know is you explore. You discover that in your body. And I've been speaking to a client about this recently where she's like, I don't know what I want yet, but I want somebody to be able to discover that with me so that we can go those places together. And ultimately, like each of us individually has the responsibility to like nourish our own soil and to figure that out about what it is that we want and to know what it is that turns us off, to know what it is that turns us on, and to be able to communicate that. And that just can feel really advanced when you're like, but I don't even know what I want. I don't even know what.
Yeah, it's like we're missing the fact that the first relationship we have is with ourselves, and it's ultimately the most important one. Any other relationship is icing on the cake. So the backwards way that religion has us going into it is relationship with other, and then somehow you're supposed to just fucking know a relationship with yourself as well. But like this is never going to really work. So yeah, so I want to ask you, if somebody is exploring their desires and they're concerned, like, I'm worried about where my desires are going to lead me, what would you say to them? How do they start exploring that in a safe way? Like, what are some of your ground rules that aren't pulling from religious morality, but in the greater wide world, what are we looking at where desire is appropriate to explore, and like, what are the fences?
Okay, thank you for that. One of the first things that comes up for me is around how we've been taught. I can say this like as a woman who like spent 30 years in a very controlling religion. I remember basically the message was like, your body is dangerous. Your shoulders are going to cause people to commit sin. Like they cannot hold on to themselves. Like if they see the small of your back, like that's just it. That takeaway is difficult to digest, this idea that I have to be the one as the female to help protect his thoughts because he couldn't possibly hold on to himself. Like I am now not only responsible for my purity, but I'm responsible for his as well. And that is pretty fucked up. I feel like it's a pretty slippery slope into rape culture, right?
Wow. Wait, let's just pause there because that's really, really important. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Just really briefly talk about how that's a slippery slope into rape culture because I'm tracking, but I just want to make sure we pause there.
Yeah. So I wrote a blog all about this, which I can send to you and then we can link to it. This idea about there's actually this entire museum. I'm going to jump around just a little bit and hopefully we can all track. There's a museum that's all about what she was wearing when she was sexually assaulted. And there's this whole idea. And I actually come from an image management perspective where I studied visual design. I'm a wardrobe stylist by trade. And the woman that I had studied with had essentially said like, well, if you're wearing something that's too tight or too low cut or too form-fitting, you're inviting touch. And I can hear that. I can hear what she's saying. And also that's like victim blaming. This idea of like, well, if you hadn't worn that, then he wouldn't have assaulted you. And I can understand how we like these kind of reductive ideas because it keeps us safe, right? It's like, well, if you don't dress slutty, then you're not going to be treated in this way. But this entire museum of people that had been assaulted, sexually assaulted, a lot of the outfits there were like sweats and a baggy t-shirt. Like it had nothing to do with like walking around in like thigh-high boots and fishnets. Like it wasn't that. So it's dangerous when we put girls, make them responsible for this in this way, as though men have no ability to control themselves. And also just like the victim blaming, the victim shaming. And I think one extra thing that is coming to mind when I think about like, I lived in Utah for many years, and there's a lot more assault that happens on these campuses. And they will, I think this harkens back to one of the things that you were saying earlier, Allison, like they can kick girls out of school because they've been like a victim of this. And oh, that actually goes against purity standards. Like, you invited him back to your apartment before this happened, and that actually is like against our purity culture laws. Like, there's
Yeah.
certain words for it, and I can't think of what they are. So to kick a girl out of school for that,
Yeah.
but I don't see the same accountability
Yeah.
being held for the boys and the men. Like, we've seen this, right? Like, oh, but he had such promising future, and we're thinking about his future and not her future. So anyway, this is kind of a tangled web, right, of how these things can all intersect with each other. And it starts with this type of idea of like modesty, and it feels innocent enough, and yet gets pretty dark the further that you pull on that thread.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you talked about that. And I'm so glad we paused. I'm glad we paused and I'm glad we dived in. And I'm glad you talked about the museum and also the campuses in Utah that you kind of observed some of this happening, because that's what, you usually with some of those colleges, you're going to sign, a statement of beliefs. So it's pretty much understood that they are being taught some of these purity teachings, and that's how it's coming out. And I will also briefly mention that Sheila Ray Gregoire, she has an incredible book called The Great Sex Rescue. And she
Ooh.
went over and she like, I want to say she interviewed like 30,000 evangelical women or something like that. Like, it's an insane undertaking. I could be wrong in the number, but I know it's good enough to be good research.
Ooh.
And she found, I mean, direct links between modesty teachings and rape culture. She found direct links between purity culture teachings and vaginismus. Am I saying that
Yes.
right? That's where it's
Yeah.
painful for penetrative sex, or you have spasms going on. You literally cannot have penetrative sex. She's
Yeah.
finding these links like so clear as day, based on what they're being taught, what they actually believed, and what was actually happening in the actual results of evangelical marriages. And it's fabulous. It's awful, but it's also so validating for people who are going through this stuff, and they are being the ones blamed. And we're going to get into that in our next episode about intimate relationships. But this is what's happening. The woman's always blamed. So I'm just so glad we paused here, because this was really important. So I want to ask you, for the woman who is like, okay, I'm kind of done with all of that. I'm a little scared of my desire. I'm a little scared. What kind of encouragement you want to give her?
Thank you so much for bringing that question back. So, desire has historically been seen as scary, right? Others' desire of us and our own desire. And there's absolutely fears around that, right? Where it's like, okay, well, but what if I like can't get enough? What if I become a sex addict?
Yes.
What if I, right? And all of these big questions around, what if I can't put Pandora back in the box? Like, and that can be scary. There is a tool that I would love to extend to your listeners called the yes, no, maybe checklist. And it's a really powerful tool because essentially it is about 9 or 10 pages, and it has all of the instructions within the document, but there's a list of several different pages of like sensual, erotic, and sex acts that people could be participating in. It's not the most comprehensive list in the world, but it's a great place to start. And a good way to use this document is just to scan through, print out a copy for yourself. If you're in a partnership, you can print out one for your partner as well, but just look through it and intuitively, sensing into your body, into your felt sense, just say like, what would be okay to me? There's things like hand holding, probably like eye gazing, French kissing. And then you can start to say, okay, yeah, I'd be open to this. And it gets like more intense as you go, right? More sex acts get included, and it goes some racy places. And so you can be like, no, I'm a no to group sex. I'm a no to having sex in public places. And that's totally fine. Like, this is not a homework assignment. Nobody is going to send them to me or to send them to you, right? Like, this is private. And the idea there is that it can be really useful to start to see visually the way that your desire is starting to take shape and manifest. And I taught a workshop recently where a woman had said to me, I filled this out and I was all no's across the board. And then I went back through and I changed some of my answers. And I said, yes, but did you change the answers because you wanted them to, or was that for somebody else? And she said, It was for my husband. I thought I
Yeah.
had to rearrange how I showed up for him. Doing it alone is a really great way to just like get comfortable, and maybe even just have a copy where it's only yours before you're even sharing it with somebody else, because it can take a little while for us to have courage and to stand behind what our desires are. Because if you want to do something that's a little bit edgy and you entered into a marriage that was a sacred covenant between you and your partner and God, it might be too scary to say these types of things out loud. So maybe just have a copy for you. Maybe have a copy where the intention is to share it with your other partner. And then that's a terrific way for you guys to get some information about each other as well. Anything that's no is not on the table, but anything that's a yes for both of you, essentially that's giving you like an erotic menu that you can start to explore together. Because studies show that actually women grow more tired of monogamy and kind of routine sex faster than their male counterparts. And we've been told our entire lives that that is untrue. It's a really important thing to bring novelty into our intimate relationships, whether that's like going for a hike or in a new place, like going to a new city that you've never been to before. Like novelty needs to exist. It doesn't just have to be like ropes and chains and floggers and bringing in a third, it can just be like, hey, let's have adventure and novelty. Let's get our heart rates up. And then like those experiences cause us to feel closer together, and they like rub off in a really positive way. So it's like, instead of it being like that guy again that I've been with for the last 12 years, you're starting to rewire using neuroscience that he's somebody that I associate with adventure and playfulness and fun and new activities. So it doesn't just have to start with like, hey, I bought us some, handcuffs. Let's see what we can do with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing too is that empowered desire is not just saying yes to more things. And it's not only discovering what your no's are, it's really anchoring into what you want without the external referencing.
Yeah. It boils down to like, can you reclaim the things that you want? And that's a sacred act.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Reclaiming our sexuality, reclaiming our desire, reclaiming our libido, not a pressure to be something different. What many of us in deconstruction are doing is uprooting the things that aren't us. So it's not a pressure thing. It's the opposite. It's a coming home. I love this. Thank you so much, Sarah. This was so wonderful today. And I'm so excited to come to our next episode about how high control religion affects intimate relationships as well. So that'll be next, and look for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.